Hello, everyone, and welcome to the January 2016 Dibble webinar. This is an important anniversary for us. With January 2016, we start our 4th year of monthly second Wednesday webinars. So we're thrilled to have everyone here in attendance with us, as well as our presenter, Isabel Sawhill, who I will introduce shortly. I'd like to do a quick on your webinar toolbox there, you have a way to raise your hand. So I'd like to see for how many people this is the first Dibble webinar that they have attended. So if this is your very first webinar, can you raise your hand, please, so I can kind of get a sense? Okay. Well, it looks like there's a number of you for whom this is your first webinar, and we welcome you. And for those of you who are experienced Dibble webinar participants, we're thrilled to have you back. Today we're going to be having Isabel Sawhill talk to us about her book that was published last year about the trends in family formation in young people. So let me, there she is, Isabel and myself. A little bit of housekeeping here. You all are muted, although we would like to hear your questions. So as you get questions, you can put them into the question box and send them to us, or what would be even better would be for you to wait until the end and so that we can see them all. And so that'd be better if you could wait, but if you can't wait, put them in. We will be asking some poll questions, and because we'd like to hear from you and what you know about the topic. And just so you know, this webinar will be archived, and we will send you a link to that archive when you at the end of the webinar and the days after that webinar. So it takes a few days for us to get it up. I want to also introduce Kathy Guidry. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Kathy is our engineer. And Kathy, just so you know, I can't see the questions, so I'm going to count on you to do that. For whatever reason, it's not working for me.
Surely, that sounds great.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Dibble. For those of you who are new, this is a picture of our beloved founders, Charlie Dibble and his wife, Helen. Charlie loved young people and saw how family formation in their lives would influence the outcomes of their lives. So he started realizing that no one was addressing romantic relationship formation with young people, and that he thought, he was an engineer by trade, he thought, you know, I'll tackle that problem. So his good idea, which we continue to this day, is to take research and translate that into teaching tools that then we make available to others to implement with young people, to help young people get smart about their love lives. So Dibble is a national nonprofit, independent. We, as I say, we develop materials and we sell them to people. Those materials are research-based and are evaluated, some at the highest levels. We are pleased to tell you, and I'm sure many of you know, that we have resources on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. And by our conservative estimates, we believed we've reached over 1.5 million young people in the last 10 years with some kind of relationship skills training. And to those of you in the audience who are practitioners, we owe a huge debt of thanks to you, and we're really grateful that we are on your team. So that's a little bit about Dibble, and just a little more insight into us. We believe in research. We are very strongly, we base our materials in what the research tells us. And as those of you know who follow what the most recent advice is about nutrition or weight or exercise, you know that the research evolves over time and things change. And the same thing in the field of relationship education. So we keep our materials up to date with what's latest in research, and that's what our focus is. Research means that while a trend may not be, while there could be trends, it may not apply to actually every person in that population. So while we believe in stable and healthy families in a really big way, we also understand that, you know, if a family is high conflict, abusive of self or others, or violent or abusive of substances, that family form, you know, that it's time for that family to dissolve. It's hard on kids. It's really bad for them to be in high conflict situations. But in general, if a family, you know, we believe children are best raised, have the best outcomes when they're raised by their own two parents in a committed relationship. And research tells us that the way that you have the most stable families is when those parents are married. And fortunately, now that parents all around, you know, all kinds of parents can marry, it's a more widely available option for people. So we also recognize that there are tons, literally thousands upon thousands of single parents every day putting one foot in front of the other who are doing amazing work with their kids, amazing, and really having great outcomes with their kids. But even they would say that it's hard. It's hard raising kids by yourself. And they might even say, and I've seen this in stories in various, you know, in the New York Times, the New Yorker, other places, that that they would have made different choices if they had known how tough it was on their kids to be raised by a single parent. So this means no disrespect to single parents, but even single parents would likely have made different choices. And finally, we believe strongly that all people deserve to be treated with respect, and all relationships can get better and stronger and healthier with relationship skills. So our materials, we intentionally have over many years now allowed for, or not even allowed, allows a restrictive word, but anybody, any relationship can come to the table using our programs, and they're written so that they're suitable for all kinds of audiences. So today, as I said, we're thrilled and honored to have Isabel Sawhill with us, who is a senior fellow at Brookings. I know her from her extensive work with the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. But what you may not know is that she has served as in the post of Director of Economic Study at Brookings, and the co-director on Centers and Families and budgeting for national priorities at Brookings. She does a lot of research that kind of combines, it's really interesting, the economy and social issues along with economic growth, poverty and inequality, social mobility, well-being of children, and changes in the family. And this changes in the family is actually the topic of this latest book. And so I am as eager as you are to hear from Belle. Belle.
Thank you very much, Kay. And I want to say right at the beginning that the mission of your organization, the Dibble Institute, is very much in line with my own thinking about the importance of strong families and committed relationships, but also recognizing that not everybody can have that, and that we shouldn't in any way disrespect the tremendous job that many single parents are doing. With that as background, what I called my book was Generation Unbound. That was to signal that this is really targeted to the younger generation. And the subtitle, which says it all, is Drifting into Sex and Parenthood Without Marriage. That's what I focus on. And what I'm going to talk through today is, first of all, what's been happening to the American family. Second, a little bit about why it may be happening. Third, how much it matters, what its consequences are. And finally, what we might do about it. And so I think with that as background, we want to start with this question of what's been happening. And in particular, what's been happening to marriage and to what's been happening to the proportion of all births that occur outside of marriage. And I think you all
So we're
wanted to
going to
do
have
a poll at this point.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
do a poll.
Okay.
We might have been doing this for 3 years, but every time feels like new.
I've launched the poll, so you all can use your mouse and vote on one of those. Give you a few
What
minutes
percent
there.
of children are currently born outside of marriage?
Okay.
Okay, interesting. This is not surprising to me at all. I'm assuming that most of the people on this call are much more sophisticated and well-informed than the average member of the public and many of the audiences to whom I speak. So you all mostly got this right. 40% is the right answer. And I've lost that slide now, if you can bring it back. But the interesting thing to me is that that's the proportion of babies born outside of marriage overall in the U.S. population. But if you talk about the youngest generation, let's say women under the age of 30, it is now around 50%. So it's really, to some extent, becoming almost the norm to have children outside of marriage. And that, I think, has been quite a shock to a lot of the people I talk to, at least, although perhaps not to this audience. So what I'd like to turn to next is what the trend looks like, which means going to the next slide. So this is the unmarried birth rate. And the bottom line is teenagers. And the good news there, as many of you may know, is that the teenage birth rate, and especially the unmarried teenage birth rate, which is specifically what this is, has been going down since about the early to mid 1990s. And that's really good news. But what's happened is the problem has migrated up the age scale. So the top line, which is for ages 25 to 29, but if I showed it to you for everyone in their 20s, it would look somewhat similar, although it's dipped somewhat recently from a high before the Great Recession. Overall, if you look at the long-term trend going back to 1980, you can see that that unmarried birth rate to women in their 20s or late 20s has roughly doubled over this period. And we don't know whether this recent drop, is just recession related or whether it's the beginning of an improvement in trend. So that remains to be seen. Now, the next point I want to make is that these women are not necessarily, or obviously not, having these children alone. And many times they are living with the father of the child at the time the child is born. And so a lot of people say to me, well, what's wrong with that? They may not be married, but they're cohabiting or living with the father. And so I want to talk a little bit about cohabitation and go to the next slide. So this is how much cohabitation has been increasing, and it is getting quite common. Some people cohabit prior to marrying. Some people cohabit because they really don't believe in marriage or aren't willing to make the commitment. And so there are lots of different types of cohabitations, but no question that there's a lot more of it than in the past. So what's the problem? The problem is that cohabitations, at least in the U.S., are not very stable. They tend to break up in just a few years' time. And the next slide will show you that instability in the cohabiting population. So this is the proportion of parents who have separated by the time their child is age 5. And I show you the proportion of married parents who have separated or divorced by the time their child is age 5. And then I show it for the cohabiting group as well. And as you can see, roughly half of these cohabitors split up before their child is age 5. I want now to talk next about the second point in the book, which is the attempt to talk about why we have seen these rather dramatic changes in family structure. You know, many more single-parent families, much more childbearing outside of marriage, much more cohabitation, and so forth. The divorce rate, by the way, for those of you who don't know this, has actually declined somewhat since the early 1980s. So it's no longer divorce that's driving the breakdown of the family or the growth of single-parent families. It is overwhelmingly the increase in unwed birth. These are the 3 reasons that most researchers advance for why it is we're seeing these dramatic changes in family structure. First, and in my mind very important, is the improving opportunities for women. They have more education, they can earn their own incomes, they don't need men as much as they did 30, 40, 50 years ago to support them. They can support themselves. And in addition, they no longer have their identities completely wrapped up with being a wife and mother as they once did. They now play multiple roles in our society, all of which, as far as I'm concerned, is very good news. But it means that the rationale and the need for marriage has, to some extent, been reduced. A second factor is declining economic prospects amongst men, especially less educated men. And I should have said earlier that when we look at these trends in marriage and in out-of-wedlock childbearing, there really is a difference by class or by education group, as well as by race, I might mention. On the one hand, amongst the very well-educated, marriage is still alive and well. Most of those young people are still marrying before they have children. But amongst the less educated, that's no longer true. And the big dividing line in the statistics anyway is between women with a BA and those without. So I don't want anyone to go away thinking this is just a problem for the very disadvantaged, for the sort of bottom 20% of the population or something like that. It's not. I mean, only about 30% of women have a BA, and so the other 70% all have rates of childbearing outside of marriage that are higher than 50%. It's just very low for the well-educated. The situation for men, to go back to that, is that the real earnings of men, the less skilled men, have declined. And they're not doing as well in the labor market. They're less likely to be employed, and when they are, they earn less than they used to. And so a lot of researchers looking at this say, men are no longer very marriageable, is the usual phrase. And there is a ton of research on this. And I would say it's quite mixed. I've actually done a lot of looking at the academic research in this area and even done some myself. And I would say the declining economic prospects of men have played some role, but not a really major role in this trend. And I think that will have even less impact in the future, because the underlying economic rationale for marriage, in which men were breadwinners and women were homemakers, and they had a clear division of labor, has gone away. But don't want to say that this second factor hasn't played a role. I think it has. And then finally, and really importantly, I think, are changing social norms. Now, I'm rather old, and so I can remember how the language has changed on these issues. And when I was young, we used to talk about a child born outside of marriage as an illegitimate child. And we would never say that nowadays. And we used to talk about two people who were living together, cohabiting without marriage, as living in sin. So just think about the moral overtones connected to those two behaviors, and you immediately get a quick flavor for how much social norms have changed. There's no longer any strong stigma associated with having a child outside of marriage, being a single parent, and so forth. And some of that is good, but some of it means that people are no longer inhibited by those earlier norms. Now, next question I want to address is why all of this matters. What are the consequences? And we need to move slides. I think that, as Kay said at the beginning of this session, we know that from a lot of research, this is not just myself talking, that children do fare better in stable two-parent families. Now, it's been difficult to do research in this area because as much as we all care about evidence, it's not like you can do a randomized controlled trial in which some children are raised in two-parent families and some children are raised in, say, one-parent families. So you have to do the best job you can of adjusting for all the confounding factors here and all the reasons why two-parent families may have various advantages that one-parent families don't. But even after you do that, you find that there's something about two-parent families that has a positive impact on children's life trajectories, on how they do in school and how they do in the labor market and whether they get involved in risky behaviors when they're adolescents. We also know that these trends in the family have contributed to higher rates of child poverty, more inequality, and less social mobility. Again, I won't go into any detail here, but that's what a lot of my research and some other people's research strongly suggests. Just descriptively, if you look at child poverty rates broken down between single-parent families and two-parent families, they're 4 or 5 times as high in the single-parent families than they are in the two-parent families. And the major reason for that, although not the only reason, is because two parents have two potential incomes. And bringing a second income into the family is, even if it's not all that high, is still better than almost anything else you could do. For example, anything you could do through government policy. The other thing to mention here is the higher cost to society, because given these high rates of poverty, this group is quite a bit more dependent on government assistance than other groups. And the typical single-parent family, we calculate, gets about $6,000 a year in federal government benefits. When I give talks out on the road, people like to point out to me that that doesn't include state and local expenditures, so if you added those, it would be higher. And this has led to some pushback on the part of taxpayers against single-parent families. So this is a complicated question, why it matters, and there are lots of controversies here, and I think maybe, Kay, you were going to do another poll at this point, is that right?
Right. Kathy, you want to launch the poll? So we're asking you the question of, what do you think? Does poverty lead to family breakdown? Does family breakdown lead to poverty? Or is it the dance between both? You select one of those items.
Let me give you a couple seconds. Well, no. Okay. There are the results for you.
There you go.
Well, again, this is a really smart group. I say that because you're agreeing with me, which is that it's both. This is not a situation where we can blame it all on one or the other. I think the two interact in very complicated ways. And even when there's been research that's tried to sort out the two, it's not been possible to say that the causal areas go in just one direction. I've lost my my slide now.
Let me see.
Back to
right. Okay, how's that?
That's good, and we can move on. Congratulations to everybody on the call here. You really got it right as far as I'm concerned. I want to just go into a little bit more on this question of poverty. My calculations, which were, I think, quite carefully done, I don't have time to go into the methodology here and it would be boring anyway, is that the growth of single parenthood since 1970 has increased the child poverty rate by 5 percentage points. And, keep in mind that the child poverty rate is a little over 20% in recent years. So 5 percentage points is like a 25% increase in the extent of child poverty. So this is a big impact. And then I want to contrast that to what some government programs that were designed to reduce poverty have done. Let's take the SNAP program. It's called the food stamp program. And if you just take the part of the SNAP, the overall SNAP program is about an $80 billion a year program, but if we just take the part of food stamps that focus on children, it's the increase in spending on that program that's directed towards children has been about $44 billion, and that has reduced child poverty by 3 percentage points. So it's taken a lot of government assistance to help offset this portion of the increase in child poverty that's driven by the demographic shifts we're talking about here. And I give you some similar numbers for the earned income tax credit. As a little digression or aside here, I was just contacted by ABC News about the fact that Jeb Bush, the Republican candidate for president, has just put out a new welfare plan, reform plan. In it, he proposes, you'll hear about this tomorrow, it's been embargoed for today, is my understanding. But it's already appeared in the press, so I think I can tell you that he's proposing to totally eliminate the food stamp program and make some other fairly dramatic changes in the safety net. So it'll be interesting to see how that set of proposals is received. But moving on, I want to just close with the point that what I'm trying to stress here is that we've had growing amount of assistance in the form of things like the Earned Income Tax Credit and food stamps and some other programs that are intended and aimed at reducing poverty. And so, and those programs have been effective. They have reduced poverty, and so you see all these children leaving poverty because of the increase in social programs. But then on the right-hand side, what I'm saying is that this is like conflicting trends here. At the same time that we're pulling kids out of poverty with these programs, more and more of them are falling into poverty as a result of family breakdown. So we can't just keep going in this direction forever. I would like to think that single parents who are overwhelmingly women could earn so much money that they wouldn't need government assistance, but I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime really soon. Now I want to turn finally to what to do about this, which is maybe the most controversial and interesting part of this story. So here are two people who are running for president right now, Marco Rubio and Hillary Clinton. And here's what they each have said about the family. And in my book, I call the first group the Rubios of the world, the traditionalists, and I call the Hillary Clintons of the world the village builders. And basically, they break down pretty much along conservative and progressive lines. I think both of these statements are true. So I'm not going to in any way take exception to either of these statements and what they imply. Marco Rubio is saying, let's bring back marriage, and Hillary Clinton is saying, let's do what we can for families and children, regardless of the structure of the family. And those are both good arguments. But I think the problem with the first argument, the more conservative argument, is we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to bring back marriage. In the George W. Bush administration, we funded marriage education programs, and they've been very carefully evaluated now, and for the most part, they didn't move the needle very much on marriage. In the second case, let's provide lots of support for children, whatever kind of family they're in. That's also a worthy sentiment, but it's getting fairly expensive. And even if it weren't, I think the American public values the idea of self-sufficiency and personal responsibility to an extent that it would be difficult to continue down this path much further than we've gone already. So with that in mind, in my book, I tried to think about, well, what else could we do? And I came up with a third alternative, which you can think of as a supplement, not necessarily a complete substitute for these two ideas. And what I call it, which you'll see in the next slide, is that we do what I call changing drifters into planners. And that comes from the subtitle of the book, that we have too many people drifting into parenthood without marriage. And that's because they are having accidental pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies. They are not deciding or choosing to have children once they are really ready to be parents and want children and feel they're in a committed relationship. So just a little more on what we mean by drifting. The next slide gives you a bit on that. And you can read this on your own. I've been very influenced by Danny Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winning professor at Princeton, and he's written a whole book on thinking fast, not thinking slow. And I think this really fits in with the Dibble Institute's emphasis on building relationship skills and thinking more carefully and thinking smarter about your love life. And right now, people don't seem to do that. We are creatures of instant gratification, of being short-sighted, of being not very clear in our thinking about all of this. Many young people are ambivalent. That shows up in lots of statements I could pull for you on what young women and men say, and I give you two examples here. The second one, when you ask women after they get pregnant and you ask them, well, did you want to get pregnant? And they say, no, I didn't mean to get pregnant at all. And then if you say to them, well, why did you get pregnant? They say, I just wasn't thinking. So that relates back to this Kahneman idea that people don't think about the long-term consequences of what they're doing right now. And I think it's very important to teach young people how to think more carefully about these very consequential decisions. And it will not only improve their lives, but it will especially improve their children's lives. Moving on, I want to show you how common it is to drift into parenthood. Oh, we're going to do a poll now. Is that right?
No, let's go. Let's pass that.
All right. We've just shown you the answer of the question we were going to give you, which is what proportion of single women under the age of 30 have unplanned births. Let me start with pregnancies. If you ask them whether their pregnancies were unplanned or not, 73% of them say their pregnancies were unplanned. Now, some of those unplanned pregnancies are terminated by an abortion, and so by the time you get to how many are having births that were unplanned, it's about 60%. But still, the point here is, and I really think this is a big takeaway message, a majority, more than a majority of all births to unmarried women, unmarried young women, are unplanned. By unplanned, we mean either unwanted completely or significantly mistimed, coming too soon in the woman's life. And this comes from a very large sample of about 20,000 individuals, a representative sample in a survey done by the government, the National Survey of Family Growth. And so this is about as good data as we can get on what is obviously a very personal topic. The next point I want to make is that this rate of drifting or unplanned parenting is quite different across different subgroups of women. And I show it to you here by race, by education, and by income level, or how close you are to the poverty line. And you can see that there are big differences. Look at the set of bars on the far right there. If your income is 200% or more of the poverty line, which would be for a typical family something like, let's say, $40,000–$45,000 a year, the rate of unplanned pregnancy is much lower than if you are at less than 100% of poverty, which would be an income of something like, for the same family, something like maybe 20,000 or so. So big differences with less advantaged women having the much higher rates of drifting or of unplanned pregnancy. So that might lead to the question of, well, why is there so much drifting? Why, if people don't want a child or don't want one yet at least, are they doing this? And the next slide gives you a summary of what the researchers have found there. First of all, an awful lot of young adults are simply not using birth control at all. I mean, an astonishing number, or at least not using it on every instance of sex. And those who are using it some of the time are not using it consistently. The second point is they're not using, most of the time, the most effective methods. And what do I mean by most effective methods? Most young people are either using condoms or the pill. And although the pill is much more effective in typical use than condoms, it's not nearly as effective as some of the newer and now highly recommended forms of contraception, such as IUDs and implants. And the thing about IUDs and implants, as most of you may know, is that once you have them inserted, they can last for a long time. You don't have to remember to take a pill. You don't have to get a prescription refilled. You don't have to search for a condom in the heat of the moment. And so for all kinds of reasons, they work a lot better for those of us who are just simply human and make mistakes and, forget to take a pill or get busy and don't get our prescription refilled. And in the process of being more permanent and more user-friendly, they changed the default from getting pregnant, unless you're really careful and remember to take a pill every day or use a condom every time, to not getting pregnant unless you make a conscious, explicit decision to go back to your doctor and say, I would like that IUD or that implant removed now because my partner and I have decided we want to have a baby. So that is a big deal, and that is conceptually different than other forms of birth control. There's very little use of these newer forms of contraception so far in the U.S. just since I began writing about this proportion of women using these so-called long-acting reversible contraceptives, or what we call LARCs for short, has gone up from about 2% to something like 10% or a little higher. And so there's a very big increase right now, but from a very low base. And just in the last year or two, both the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and also the American Academy of Pediatricians have both come out and said these newer forms of contraception are safe and they're effective, and they should be the first line of defense. That's their language, the first line of defense for any woman not wanting to get pregnant. So let me show you how much more effective LARCs are than other forms of birth control, and that's this next slide. So just to orient you to the slide, the failure rates of a contraceptive form, meaning, how many people get pregnant using that form of birth control after a certain number of years, is what's on the horizontal, on the vertical axis. So if you and your partner are using condoms, at the end of 5 years, they're on the bottom axis of being sexually active, most of those people are going to get pregnant. That's just the statistics of what happens under typical use. With the pill, things are a little better. It's about 38%, but still it's not a small risk. And remember now that people aren't getting married, even those who do get married, until their late 20s. And so people have, even if you can encourage teenagers to be abstinent, which I'm all in favor of, especially the younger teenagers, you've got a long period of time that you're going to be in romantic relationships and likely to be sexually active. So these rates of failure with the normal methods of birth control are somewhat discouraging. But with the LARCs, which are down at the bottom of the chart there, you can see the risk is greatly reduced because of this changing of the default that I described earlier. So how do we know that moving or encouraging young women to use LARCs instead of other forms of birth control would make a difference? Well, we have a number of strong pieces of evidence now, and here are 3 examples. A project in St. Louis called the Choice Project, run out of the medical school at Washington University in St. Louis by a brilliant doctor and PhD named Jeff Pipert. A statewide initiative in Colorado where they have introduced LARCs in family clinics, family planning clinics all around the state, and tracked the data on what happened afterwards, and a similar initiative in the state of Iowa. And I'll show you just quickly some of the data from each of those projects. This is the data from the Choice Project. This is in a medical journal, and the orange bars are what happens if you're on the pill or another standard form of birth control, and the pink and blue are what you get from a LARC or from a shot like the Depo Provera shot. And they found in all of these projects well, here's Colorado, and that number is actually gone up with the release of more recent data. All I can tell you is they had a big impact on not only teen pregnancy rates, which is what the newspapers like to talk about, but also on women who are a little older than that, in their 20s, and especially on disadvantaged women who are unmarried. Big impacts. They've made national news. They've been on the front page of the New York Times. And then Iowa, similar set of data in the next slide. And again, there was a much more take-up rate of these newer forms of birth control after women were encouraged to take it up, given good counseling, And the devices were made available free of charge. I should have said that earlier. Really important point. And then a big drop in unintended pregnancies as well. And so we have evidence that this stuff can't work, that when given the right kind of counseling and education and told about the safety and effectiveness, women will select these newer forms of contraception, and they will reduce teen pregnancy and unplanned pregnancy amongst unmarried women. So with that as background, what do we need to do? Next slide. There's some things the government needs to do. I think the government needs to provide more opportunity to young people. And you all know the standard litany of things we could do there. Improve education, especially provide more career and technical education to those who are not going to four-year colleges and getting BAs and may not be interested in that. And then, you know, make the labor market work a little better, improve people's earnings through some of the standard things like the minimum wage and the earned income tax credit, et cetera. Keep the economy at full employment, all that kind of stuff. I'm in favor of that. But I think we also need to empower women to only have children when they really want them and with whom they want them, and not too early and not in some casual relationship. And we have done some things already on that front. The Affordable Care Act does now make LARCs available at no cost, with no copay to the woman. So the price barrier has really been greatly reduced. There's still some implementation issues there. Not all the insurance companies and all the community health centers and Medicaid programs and so forth are doing this right yet, but we've made some big strides there. For healthcare providers, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much I've been shocked by how out of touch many of them are, especially the older ones. They weren't trained in the insertion of LARCs. They don't know about them. They think they're unsafe. They remember the Dalkon Shield and some earlier forms of birth control that were not safe, and they have stayed away from them. They're afraid of liability and so forth. And then finally, young people themselves don't even know about the availability of these newer forms of contraception, so we need education. We may need a social marketing campaign to get them on board. But, and my next and last slide is that we can't do this with government alone. We need to care about individual behavior. We need to celebrate personal responsibility. And we need to imbue young people with new attitudes, new norms, new values. We need to tell them that bringing a child into the world is one of the most important things that any of us as adults ever does, and that you shouldn't do it before you really want to be a parent, and you shouldn't do it before you're in a committed relationship. And marriage was historically a good way of ensuring that commitment and that kind of planning. But it seems to be disappearing. I'm not terribly optimistic about bringing it back, although we can try. And so I want to add to the old norm, this new norm, which is that you shouldn't have children until you and your partner are ready to be parents. So that's it. If you're interested in reading more, my book is available in lots of different places, and you can also find tons of commentary and supplementary material on the Brookings website under the book's title. So thanks for being so patient and for listening, and look forward to getting your questions and your thoughts and your observations from your own practice. I really would like to learn along with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks very much. All interesting information. Kathy, are there questions?
Yes, we have one question. Maria would like to know, if a young person does not enroll in insurance or the Affordable Care Act, and needs a LARC, what happens, or how do they get it?
You can go onto a website called bedsider.org. Bedsider.org. And on that website, you will learn a lot about different types of birth control, and also you can put in your zip code and learn where the nearest clinics are that might be able to help you. And I think that it probably depends upon your individual circumstances if you don't have insurance, but I would intend to go to one of the clinics that's listed on the website.
Okay, great. Back on slide, and I don't think Kate can go back there, but there was a slide on 25, and there was a question. I think the last thing that you said, Belle, was what did women say when they were asked why did you get pregnant? And they said they just weren't thinking. Do you remember that slide there? The question that someone asked is, were those questions asked of young men as well?
No, very good question, but unfortunately the survey that's done talks only to women because women are the ones who get pregnant and have babies. And we don't know nearly as much about the men, but a very standard question and reaction that I get when I give talks about this is, what about the men? Why aren't the men also being more responsible? Don't they fully share in the responsibility here to make childbearing a planned and welcomed event? And the answer is yes, but we don't have as good research or data on the men. And we also, even though we've tried, and when I say we, I'm thinking about organizations like the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, have tried to shine a light on the men, but we haven't figured out any really good ways to get them more fully engaged. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. If anybody on this call has ideas about that, I would welcome them.
For sure. Okay, Brenda says that part of the issue that she's dealing with with as a foster parent is that kids are sure that their boyfriend is going to be forever. Do you have any ideas on addressing this particular attitude?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that we don't think very well about the long term. Not any of us. It's not just young people, although they may have slightly shorter time horizons than the rest of us. And I think really it's incumbent upon adults and some of the kind of relationship skills programs that Dibble and others are involved in to really emphasize to young people that it might be forever, but the statistics suggest it might not be. Maybe even show them the statistics.
Well, and I have a thought on that, and that is, when young people, what we've learned over in our experience in educating young people about relationships, this is Kay Reed speaking, is that they don't actually understand a lot about relationship formation, and they have a lot of faulty relationship beliefs. So, for instance, if you say to a young person, you know that feeling like when you're in love and your feet aren't touching the ground and your head is in the clouds and you can only think of that person, and that's wonderful. We all love that feeling, but that's your brain on drugs. And the hormones are bathing your brain and making seeing really hard and seeing the reality. And so what we often say in our program materials, and if you go to our website, there's lots of sample lessons you can take a look, is that if you wait 6 months, if you go slow, lots of people break up after 6 months because that's when those hormones subside and you start to see your partner more clearly. So enjoy that time. We're not saying don't have a great time, infatuation, puppy love. We all love that. But don't get a joint cell phone plan, don't buy a puppy, and don't get pregnant during that time because people do break up. And the other point, sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
the other point, and it goes to Belle's point about planning, is that young people, the fact is they can choose about their relationships. They can choose about having children, and lots of times there isn't communication between the two. So, two people. So I'm reminded of a Oprah Winfrey show many years ago where she had a guy and a gal and their mom. I don't know how she did this, but she had a dating pair and their mothers and a therapist, and they were deciding whether to have sex or not. And they said, and these were pretty young teenagers, and they said to they separated them. They brought the girl out, and they said, what do you see for the future of this relationship? And she says, oh, it's forever. He's 15, he's a man, I love him. And then they brought out the boy, and that she was away, and they brought out the boy, and the boy said, well, I think about 6 months, And so when the little girl saw this, it was just shocking to her that their expectations she just assumed it was, her dream, her hopes for the future were his as well. So, part of what relationship education does is it helps young people understand how relationships form and develop over time, and then gives them the skills to have those conversations with their beloved about what the future holds, and do they see a future together. And so that's another really good reason, I think, to try to figure out how to get, especially foster youth. Imagine the holes in the heart that those kids have, the trauma they've had. How to get them, give them these tools that are so essential to making good choices.
I think those are really important points. I love them. I think that going slow and not being impulsive is critical. I think communication is critical. One of the ways I've put it in the past is if you can't talk about sex, you're not ready to have it. And I would just add one other point, which is that you need to experiment with different kinds of relationships or people before you make a final choice. We don't think that the very first job you go into is necessarily going to be your final job. And I don't want to sound like I'm in favor of casual relationships, but we do know that stable marriages, marriages are much more likely to be stable if the two people have married later rather than earlier and have had a little bit of life experience first. So I think all your points are really well taken, and would just really emphasize that relationship education can be a big help here.
The other thing we're discovering, and we're just the results of a pregnancy prevention evaluation are about to be made public, and what I can tell you from preliminary results is that the program that we evaluated, or which was evaluated at the University of Louisville, with very at-risk teenagers, they evaluated love notes against some very well-respected, well-evaluated programs, and they actually found that by giving young people these tools, which include some on pregnancy prevention, contraception, etc., but also tools around forming and developing healthy relationships, that the young people in love notes had equivalent results to the young people who are taking these standardized kind of comprehensive sex programs, and the young people taking love notes were having sex in safer relationships, however they defined that. I don't have that definition. But we are seeing that there are promising practices that, again, when we discuss the social and emotional sides of sex, and not just, you need to talk about the plumbing side of sex, totally get that, but putting it in context really helps young people make good choices.
I just couldn't agree more. I use a somewhat different language. When I wrote a piece for the New York Times on all of this, which was called Beyond Marriage, I really strongly harped on just what you're saying in slightly different language. It's this idea of you need the means of preventing an unplanned pregnancy, the LARC, etc., but you also need the motivation. And the motivation comes from having opportunities in your life, but it also comes from understanding the importance of relationships and the importance of having children and what it takes. And that's the social side of this, as you said.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of our hour. I appreciate you so much, Belle, for taking your time. I know you're a busy gal. And to all of you who attended today, we really appreciate that. If there are additional questions we haven't gotten to, we will get back to you personally on those. We will be sending you an email with a link, or when you exit this, there's some survey questions. We'd appreciate you answering those. It helps us plan future webinars and also better address your needs. And then we will also send you another email in a few days with the archived version, so you can share this with your colleagues and friends. I think it's really important information. Please, if you're listening in on this webinar, please join our newsletter, or we have the most modern, the modern Facebook and LinkedIn social media if you want to stay in touch, and that is my direct email and our 800 number if you want to talk to us directly. And finally, next month, the topic will be love and the movies. We've taken classic and current movies and developed discussion guides, which are available. They are available for free for people to use. Sometimes you don't have time to use a whole curriculum. You want to do something a little more light and lively. And so we've given you more tools for that, some free movie guides, and that's what we'll be going over in February. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And Belle, again, thank you so much, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.